this early in the morning. But thanks for getting up early with us for a hopefully lively discussion to dive into the world of streaming and venture into what we've dubbed as the streaming verse for talking through kind of where we've been over the last few years, where we are from an academic streaming perspective, and hopefully where we are going. Maybe as a starting point, we want to start with introductions.
Sure. Hi, good morning. I'm Winifred Fordham-Metz. I'm from the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. I'm 40. It's 8:30.
Hi. And my name is Danette. I'm Danette Patchner. I work at Duke University Libraries. And we are down the road from Winifred's institution. And we actually are very collegial in how we work together.
In spite of our sports rivalry.
Which we think is bananas. And just to give you a sort of framework, Duke is a private university. We have 6,700 undergrads, just under 10,000 graduate students. So that's sort of an interesting lean towards graduate work. We're an R1 research library system. And also, most of our campus is on site. We don't have a really big online environment. So that sort of helps drive what we're going to be talking about today.
My name is Brian Edwards. I'm with Swank Digital Campus. I recognize a number of you, so hopefully everybody's familiar with Digital Campus, but we provide academic streaming of feature films and documentaries to both higher ed and K-12 schools, amongst other licensing options that we provide as an organization. Our primary kind of differentiator, I guess, if you'll say that we have, is just the nature of the content that we work. We work with all of the large major studios and hundreds of other smaller ones, so Disney and Warner Brothers, Sony, Paramount, Lionsgate, MGM, all of these studios that you've heard of is what really makes up our library of 35,000 films. For today, we thought we'd take a little bit of a, if I can switch slides here, yeah, take a little bit of a unique perspective on a panel discussion in that we were really hoping to facilitate something organic, just based on the differences in institutions, also combined with us as a vendor, where we kind of went into this with a direction of what we wanted to talk through, but not necessarily wanting to define some sort of script. So this will be the only real slide that we have, just to kind of set the stage of the topics. We use these as sort of our North Star, just to make sure that we were all heading in the same direction as far as conversation, but we also chose not necessarily to rehearse any of this. We've outlined some discussion points and some questions that we hope to dive into, but we've not necessarily discussed each other's answers to those questions, and understand that we might venture off those depending on where the conversation goes. So we were really hoping to put through an organic conversation where we could hopefully be open and honest about where things are in the world of streaming and the state of institutions these days, and how streaming is being used, and kind of the differences perhaps in perspectives from institutions and vendors and all of that. So, and with that, maybe we'll go ahead and get started with, I guess, question one to kick us off. But how has the overall role of the library evolved in the last 5 years for each of you?
Well, I'm sure we all have very, very similar answers. And we do hope at the end that we allow enough time for lots of questions from where you're coming from, because I'm always interested in what other places are doing. So at Duke, I would say that we've been moving online anyway. Ebooks are our preferred purchasing model for anything outside of sort of art and some of the humanities, where we can specify that we want print. We've had a push for open access for a number of years, and I know there's so many sessions here talking about that. I don't think we're there yet, but we're really trying to think about what that looks like in the next 5 years, and that's something that we're continuing to sort of make a mission statement for our library. We're also, of course, moving away from the big deals. Sorry if there's anyone from one of those vendors in the room, but I think we're all realizing that one-size-fits-all really doesn't work. And so we can talk about that in sort of the streaming universe. And specifically for film, I know this sounds really obvious, but when DVDs were sort of king and all the students came into campus with a laptop that had a drive, we were really able to use our collection that way, and things were pretty straightforward. And then as soon as the industry decided that they wanted more lightweight, take out the drives, all of a sudden the online streaming universe became very, very different and really key. And then of course when COVID hit, that was it, right? In our university, we were actually mandated from administration to not be able to buy anything physical. Everything had to be purchased that year online, and so we just, we're like, well, look, we're all set for some stuff, but not for others. So that's sort of what happened.
Yeah, so I should have set up our institution a little bit. I'll give you guys a rundown. We're 31,000 FTE. comprise in the majority of undergrads, about 19,000 of those, and 11,000 with the grad and professional programs. We have 65 doctoral degrees, 95 bachelor degrees, and 104 masters, so we're a busy little campus. That's all supported by about 4,000 faculty and 1,000 staff. We are the nation's first public library, and sometimes we're known as a public Ivy, even though there's the real Ivy down the road.
No, we're not.
Well, I mean, do.
We're an Ivy
Less.
Just
And we are the flagship school. So for us, who we reach and who our patrons are is really expanded to the state, and it's a really big part of our mission. And we are in good company with 17 other institutions in the North Carolina system. And we take that very seriously, and we all work together. We have a consortia, we share, we actually share with Duke. I don't know why, but we do.
State and central.
And it's a state and central. So it's a really nice community, and it gives our patrons more options and more opportunity to get access to the research that they need. So for us, the same thing that Danette said, it's really about moving to digital. Well, we were doing that so long ago. It's been a progression for 10, 12 years. Breaking those big deals has been going on for a long time. We're really interested in OA, and I'm very interested in how that can go into the streaming verse. You know, we've been putting a lot of energy into offering a more robust scholarly communications program and really partnering with faculty and graduate and undergraduate researchers to try to help promote what their interests are in their research. So we jump in on that research life cycle early, and we stay there through the whole thing. And we also do that, like, my role is interesting because I get to curate the film collection, but I also run the Media and Design Center in the undergraduate library, and the center is devoted to digital literacy and media literacy and design. So we do a lot of course integrated instruction, we do a lot of partnering and consultation with faculty from the beginning, we run a lot of grants for faculty to understand the value and the pedagogy behind assigning visual media projects, and we spend a lot of time with them, like really helping them see the importance of being able to communicate research across multiple modes, and then that goes back very nicely and seamlessly to the collection, right? So they feed each other. It's that sort of consumption and analysis to production. So yeah, for us, it's like building on what Danette said, and then also we spend a lot of time with our special collections, thinking about trying to better represent underrepresented voices, making sure that our collections really serve and reflect the variety of patrons that we support. And then we're examining our spaces. We're looking at them through different lenses. We are doing a lot of surveys. We're trying to figure out like the ownership of those spaces. And then to go along with that, we're doubling down on the importance of staff expertise. So there's a lot, we've had some really interesting opportunities for staff, new positions, reworking some old positions, really trying to partner more front house, back house, doing a lot of work with our technical services. There's a lot of internal partnership. Oh yeah, so how do you find and select content in this digital campus collection?
Yeah, so maybe a couple of things there. So I mentioned we have a library of over 35,000 films. So that the nature of our relationships with studios, which drives kind of the overall library of available content, is really driven through. We have an individual who kind of owns all of that internally. She has a relationship with all of these studios. We certainly ingest a lot of feedback from schools about new content and opportunities that may be available within that library of films, and we are excited to explore those new opportunities, especially now. I think we're getting into a lot of demand for different types of content than we have in years past. Short form content, for example, has over the last couple of years significantly grown as far as demand and need goes on campuses, and so we're looking at ways that we can partner with other entities that might have more of that kind of obscure content. I think our brand for so many years has been this kind of feature films, but we're also exploring other ways. And within that, I think where Danette and Fred are going is related to our curated collections that we provide to institutions. So to kind of level set, we have a number of different licensing models that we work with in schools. One of them is more traditional demand driven. We offer both mediated and unmediated in that, right? It's access to the full 35,000 plus library of films. I say mediated or unmediated. I think we might keep me honest here, but maybe 1 or 2 schools that don't mediate within our platform. Everything is.
That must be nice.
Well, I say that. I also am not sure I'm aware of a single instance where somebody mediating has said no. Right? I mean, there's the instructors asking for content. I don't know that there's that moment of, I don't think you really need this kind of thing, right? And so outside of that, we do collection-based acquisition, and within that, we'll curate libraries of films. Generally speaking, we allow all of you to be the experts in that curation, even though we're driving the kind of films that dive into these collections. So we use a lot of data analytics. We use the utilization through our mediated process or our title request demand-driven process. We look at that data annually in our curated collections. Most popular is top 1,000, growing in that as our top 1,500, which are really low per title rate collections that schools can add through us. But we look at what schools are actually using within all of our films, both inside and outside the collections, as well as then the newest release titles that are coming through from our studio partners that we know have significant relevance in academics. And we'll build in a handful of those a year just to make sure that the collection does stay current. But it's all driven off of what schools are actually utilizing on an annual basis. And the collection does shift every year slightly. I will say that on average it's 35, 45 films that kind of evolve within our top 1,000 collection that we do provide, which again is our kind of, all of our other sub-collections we really build off of this top 1,000, top 1,500 and just piece off smaller segments for schools that are looking for smaller collections. But again, it's really driven off of what schools are utilizing so that we can have the most alignment with campuses, with instructors, with students, and overall demand that everybody has. I will say too with that sorry, one more thing, that we made a decision to do internally to limit disruption with these collections is we actually allow for schools to maintain their existing collection and not evolve with the changes in the collection. We understand, again, there's some disruption to professors who have kind of the set films that they're using, and by kind of going down the road of changing that collection every year, there's the opportunity for some level of disruption. So we actually catalog on our end different versions of those every year and maintain those iterations every year, so schools can either change and evolve with that collection and take on the newest content that's getting utilized more frequently across campuses, or maintain their existing collection. And that is, I think, about split half and half. About half of our schools do change every year. They want the most current, most relevant, newest releases that happen, but then ultimately we have about half that just want that stable collection that used year over year.
All right, so I'm going off script already. So I'm so curious about how Swank started and then you got into the educational market. Can you do like a 2-minute speech?
2 minutes is I'm a talker, so 2 minutes will be tough, but I'll try.
Keep them.
Hold me accountable here. So, yeah, Swank's an interesting story. I've been there for 6 years, but Swank's been around since the mid-1930s. Swank is a licensing organization as a whole, in partnership with these studios in what's called a non-theatrical environment. So this means outside of movie theaters, outside of airplanes, outside of hotels. In B2B settings, we will license movies. So everything from public performance licenses, so if you're hosting an event on your campus, or if the local park is hosting an event, your town is hosting a movie night, for example, those licenses generally come through us. Cruise ships, hospitals. If you've been in prison lately, you might have watched one of our movies. But Swank, over these last 80, 90 years at this point, has really kind of developed this ongoing relationship with all of our studio partners that has created just a level of trust that studios fly out and meet with us on an annual basis, typically, just so that we can align our interests. But it all started from a guy named P. Ray Swank showing movies on the sides of barns in the Midwest. We're in St. Louis. As a way to attract farmers to farmers markets, and realizing that this was probably not legal at the time, drove out to California and got the licensing rights and started to build on that over the years. And certainly the company has changed significantly with film reels to VHS to DVDs, and now in the world of streaming. And now as we go into streaming, we're evolving into different areas of streaming. We've been in colleges and universities now since 2008, 2009-ish. We just started getting into K-12 schools from an academic streaming perspective back in late 2018, 2019. But generally speaking, how we get there into new areas is, again, from the demands. The individuals telling us that there's a need for these resources. We have and develop and build all of the streaming platforms in-house, so we've got the foundational aspects in order to maintain it, and then we explore those options and kind of evaluate that need that's been presented to us, but then ultimately go back to our studio partners and confirm with them that they're comfortable in us now providing content in those settings. But streaming is a risky one for the studios, right? And there's, they have heavy investments in things like Disney Plus, right? And Netflix and HBO Max and all these other ones. And so there's a little bit of risk for them in the streaming world, or at least perceived risk in the streaming world. So fortunately, our long-standing relationship gives them a lot of comfort in how we provide content and where that's not necessarily threatening to their other ventures. Yeah. So talking about licensing models, what factors do you consider when evaluating new resources or new licensing models available?
Right. So I think we all have a very similar process, maybe slightly different. At Duke, we definitely always do a trial of a new product. And I want to get as much feedback as possible. Because I forgot to say, unlike Winifred, I'm not a head of a production center. I'm a subject librarian, and I handle film and video and gender, sexuality, and feminist studies, and now actually theater studies. But I think all of those are sort of interdisciplinary and feed into each other. So I try to get as much feedback as I can from faculty, graduate students, if there's a class using this stuff, then the students as well. And then I take all of that information and feedback and work with our collection development team. As everyone does, we use a lot of metrics, right? We try to figure out what are the views, how long are people viewing. I think in a lot of the humanities areas, it's really difficult because you don't want to use just straight up metrics and not look at the qualitative uses. So I think we really have to sort of build the idea of how this stuff is being used, why it's important. It might not be high use right now, but we see it developing in different areas. So I think really building your case as much as possible, using as many of your partners on campus is super important.
Yeah, so like Jeanette, big consideration for us is that the content supports existing curriculum and has enough content moving forward to expand on new research and new opportunities, right? So ease of use, ease of access, reliability. We've been doing this through different formats for a while, so we've come to know, the catalogs and who has what content, and where are the good anthropological documentaries, where's the good indie films, where's we just sort of know who to contact and who's reliable with their content. We know that it's going to be high production value. We know that it's going to be an own voice. We know that the perspective is not going to other. We know, really important things about just that content. And so reliability is huge for us. And then wanting to know in the streaming that if a professor's in a classroom and something goes sideways, that we're going to get quick help on the other end. So for us, there's that sort of factor of reliability. So that's sort of our foundation. And we've been doing streaming since 2005. And we were with a group of media librarians that started sort of driving the platforms early days of having meetings with a bunch of known large vendors on how to, giving them feedback on how to drive their platforms and what might help improve those platforms along the way. So that's like a big deal for us. But then I also like to just push the limits and I like to test things out. We're both really active in film festivals, and so we're seeing things prior to festival, and then once they are shown. And so I want that content, and I get really excited about that new stuff. So I'm constantly reaching out to folks and saying, hey, have you thought about this? And can I be a beta tester for that? And I'll give you a report and I'll help you understand the use. And like Danette was saying, we do a ton of quantitative measuring, but the qualitative for me is where it's at, because I like to know what the real research resonance is. And I like to hear the stories about why this film changed that kid from a bio major to a film major, or why somebody started making their own short films because they saw something that really made them feel like, I have a story to tell and I want to share it. So I think that, like Danette was saying, we really need that balance of quantitative and qualitative. I'm not the best record keeper. My staff, I have members on my staff that are fantastic, and I'm so grateful for them, because I find it really loathsome to have to put a tick down on my calendar for every research consultation I do, or every time that I meet with somebody, or every time somebody walks in and I help them. I'm really, really bad about that. And I'm reminded time and time again, can do it. And it's real. We need it to justify our dollars, right? We absolutely need that. And we need that data. But I love the storytelling, right? That's where my passion is. And so I want to be able to connect people and have a real understanding of the reach. And when we were counting off all of those programs and areas of research on our campus, we help everybody except for math. That's why I wail. I get one, like before I retire, I want to be like, math, I've helped you in some way. Either with production
It's
or.
called Flatland, that's the best.
Yeah, okay, well, we need to come up
Okay,
with
I'll
some
come
of that. But so I'm like heavy on the quantitative, or whatever that's worth, I don't know if that's helpful.
How do the two of you, when selecting a streaming provider, determine collection-based acquisition, PDA? How do you determine the model ultimately that you're going to choose from? And there's a lot, right? I mean,
Yeah,
there's
so-
a lot of choices out there.
Yeah.
For us, it's a melange. I like to mix it up. I don't want to be set in one specific thing. It started with ease of use. It started with the fact that I didn't want to make too much work for our tech services staff with like a ton of onerous stuff to do and on our side. So we really doubled down on vendor side streaming at the beginning. Or we bought these large packages that would, like seed the initial streaming collection. And so it was sort of one shot, and we would just be able to do all the records at once. And now I see that we're sort of moving back from these vendor side streaming to having more ownership and more curation with DSLs.
Right, I think absolutely. Especially in COVID, if something wasn't available, you had to go out and get it. Unless you could convince, which Whitaker is very good at convincing faculty to use something we already have, especially if the need is a really short lead time. And I think that's great. That takes a lot of work and tons of knowledge of the collection.
But it's the most fun part of my job. So I would really love to work with faculty early and often and get, like even when I do the beta testing, I match up the catalog and I have to get at least 20% of that into filmographies, into syllabi to justify it, right? And we enter a beta at like a very low price point usually, like whatever the normal price is. And so I'm able to justify it to, our budget team. Well, we have a collection steering committee and I'm on that. So I'm able to sort of bring that to folks and say, look, this is like a one-time shot, but it's a small amount and we're gonna be able to automatically out of the gate use this 20%. It's already gauged the classes. People are expecting it, it's gonna be great. But sometimes it doesn't work. I mean, I think with the betas that we've done for the last 7 years, I've only probably kept about half the products. Is that good?
Yeah, that's.
So now we ask, how do you determine the pricing models that Swank offers?
So from a pricing perspective, we obviously have to build in this cost associated with delivery of content. When you provide it streaming, there's a cost that goes into the actual, every time a movie is being streamed, there's a cost of bandwidth that's occurring, right? So we have to factor that in. Obviously, our studio relationships and royalties obviously get built into our pricing. We try and stay aligned with the market itself. We try and certainly take into account what other streaming providers are offering, but then also, Swank's story going back from the 1930s, you don't stay in business that long without creating sustainable models. And so all of our pricing is meant to kind of align with those needs we have on the expenses that goes into providing a streaming platform and development of new resources and development of new interfaces and functionality and all of that, paying royalties, but also making sure that we're able to do so in a way that is aligning with the needs of campuses and aligning with the needs of instructors. We realize that it doesn't always kind of meet on the exact same desire to what the offer is, but ultimately we really want to create sustainable options and options that are able to be afforded, right? I mean, the maintaining of streaming at the institutional level is, I think, a desire of everyone's, and however we realize we can't get there if we are pricing ourselves out of the market. So we really do try and align with schools, and then that goes back to the various licensing options that we provide. We have varying models based on school size. We take into account enrollment. We take into account community college versus four-year school. We really try and align with the schools and their budgets. We have various models that we provide that are different. If you're at a very large institution, there's a very different budget availability and very different needs across campus than there is at a small school of 912 students. And we realize that, so we create various licensing options that do align hopefully with the school sizes as much as possible. Yeah, jumping down. So you both currently subscribe to Swank's Top 1,000, Top 1,500 collection and shifted from mediated demand driven. What is it about the Top 1,000 that aligns with your needs? This kind of goes back to our last question, but why the change, right? Why shifting off of demand driven into a larger collection-based model?
My answer is going to be short and sweet. It's that known content and the need for, we all use our campus reserves, course reserves and research projects, and then pursuits, honestly, right? Whole students is a big thing for us in the undergraduate library, and having things that they can use in between to blow steam, in between classes. And then really it's reliable. We've worked with you all for many years, and we need the content.
And at Duke, we did mention the Ivy Plus earlier, and we are the Plus in the Ivy Plus. And a lot of those folks had adopted it, and so it wasn't on my radar, other than when it first came out, I wasn't excited by the title list, I have to say, but it became amazing the way you guys did it. So it just seemed like it was definitely worth the money. We used a strong percentage of course reserve titles already in it, so it really paid for itself. And I also like how much it saves staff time in terms of putting MARC records into the OPAC. It's just once a year, you just load the batch and it's there. That was absolutely fantastic. We still do title by title for things that aren't in there, because we get, people want stuff. So we still do that, but it just made a lot of sense for us, timing-wise. Yeah. That's a simple one. So, now we get to move into a fun area. So how do you guys feel that Swank is addressing equity to access in streaming media? And you talked about this a little bit already. HBCUs, community colleges, how are you sort of reaching out to make sure that everyone can get access?
Yeah, so again, I think this probably dives back into licensing models and the changes that we make over time. In the beginning, not even in the beginning, back in 2016, 2017, all we really had was our demand-driven and a little bit of collection-based acquisition, but that was smaller collections, 50 movies, 100 movies. I think the realization after looking at the data of that is just that it's really hard to target a need across campuses with such a small collection, right? And so over the course of time, we build onto that. And we've been meeting lately about, and this may be transition into our final topic of meeting ahead, but looking more at models that will fit those smaller schools and will fit those more underfunded schools, where the needs are different than they are for the larger institutions, right? We've done some testing of this with a couple of our consortium partners who are very heavily on the small school side, the small budget side, where again the needs are just different than what they are at a large institution. A large institution, right? The target there is perpetual access. We don't offer that at this point, but I think that's the ultimate goal of sustainability, long-term licensing, right? Cataloging, discoverability, all of those things show up as very important. And when you get down to some of these smaller, more underfunded schools, they have different priorities about enabling access and facilitating access. And so we're working on licensing models that would be more of a manageable solution that doesn't take as many resources internally within a library to help sustain those models, right? The ability to, instead of trying to manage hundreds if not thousands of individual licenses, all of which would come with their own license dates and cataloging all of these resources, right? An ability to have kind of some fixed window access to either collections or demand-driven content within a fixed window, right? An annual, if you will, subscription type model where we're able to provide it, again, taking into account the school size, the overall budget, get into more of an affordable range for those schools. They don't necessarily have nearly the size and scope of need across the campus because their campuses are so much smaller. They're a little bit more focused, and they can, in some cases, get away with less availability of content than some of the larger institutions. So I think just hearing from schools, understanding what the needs are, what the challenges are, what is really driving our evolution and how we kind of set up our licensing models. And our overall goal internally is not to create kind of one fixed static licensing option or even engine that we roll out to schools. We talk about this on a weekly basis with the entire team of what is the feedback that we are receiving from schools and how can we better align based on what we're hearing from everybody. So certainly the more feedback that we're able to get, the more information we're able to ingest from our partner schools through our advisory board, which we're looking to evolve, is ultimately what's going to have us be able to offer, I think, or make access more available and sustainable in every institution. Hopefully that answers your question. So then maybe leaning forward, what does this look like in 3 to 5 years? We've got,
Oh my
I think,
God.
maybe 10 minutes
30
left. We
seconds,
want to
yeah.
leave some
Here we go.
questions, but what does this look like moving forward? What does streaming look like in 3 years?
Okay, I'm gonna make a statement that we all agree. The current pricing models are not sustainable. They just aren't. And basing pricing models on an FTE of the overall school is also not, I don't feel it's right. Because we see the use stats, we see how the reach is, and while I might say that we're affecting, dozens and dozens of departments, that's true. But it might be one class at a department. It's 30 students. It's not 31,000 students. And having to be priced for all of the streaming at that rate is simply not right. It's just, it doesn't make any sense. So I would love to see that evolve. I think content's going to become even more curated. We're all moving into ownership of DSLs, but we're also doing this, multi-pronged approach with some subscriptions, some short-term access, really pushing it back on our faculty and our students to do direct-to-consumer platforms when they can, looking for open access resources online, helping them, find research content, media content in other ways, utilizing things that are being produced by our students, things that are being produced by our researchers on campus. So I think that our jobs as media curators and media librarians is going to need to continue to morph into more of a curatorial role than a collecting role, and being flexible and listening to our faculty and listening to our students about what they want, and survey often, and more consultations. Our consultations have risen over the years, and they're just continuing to rise. And for me, that's like a really fun part of my job. So I like really engage in it heavily. I know that a lot of people that have instruction duties or other duties, it's kind of hard to do a really robust consultation service. But I think that's one of the things that keeps us moving along and having a really good variety and really seeing really high use of our collections. I think that people are going to just keep moving to those consumer platforms. It's just a given. I think that that's fine. I think there's room for both. So much content's coming out that needs to be curated by companies like yours and offered to us, but I think that there's room for people to effectively and strategically use those platforms too. And I think OA has to happen in some regard. I know that some places are beginning to put films in the public domain on their platforms, or routing to certain things or highlighting certain things. But we need some more. We need some more OA happening in streaming. And then more representation for diverse voices. And I don't know how to solve this, but definitely just across the board, more equity and access.
Right. And I think we have a lot of these titles. It's getting people to see them, right, and to be able to highlight them without, I don't know how to put it, without making it look false, right? We already have this. It's integrated in our collection. I know there's a push at both of our institutions and sort of across the country for more equity, as we said, but for first-generation students. So I understand what Winifred is saying about some consumer platforms. That's the only way you can get the content. It really, truly is. But we try to provide as much as we can so that they don't have to pay for it. Because for some students, they just can't. They might not have a credit card. I don't know. It might not be possible. And that's a really, really tricky thing, especially at an institution like Duke, where a student might not want to say to his colleague in class, "Can I piggyback on your account?" We never do that. But so much as that's it.
Just because you get into a university doesn't mean you can afford it.
Exactly. No. And we're really feeling that strongly. The push for more diversity, representation of voices that are easily accessible and findable. And we all know that budgets everywhere are not increasing, and usage of streaming is increasing. It's just a way of life. People super expect it. So I think just like educating people, I work really closely with all my fellow subject librarians to try to explain to them what the situation is, and it's hard to remember, because that's not their job, it's my job. So I have to constantly say, this is how we do it, just ask for it ahead of time. We'll get it, but you can't ask for it 2 days before, if we don't already have it in the catalog, that type of sort of interaction. So we talked about this already, but you can sort of help us wrap up, Ryan, with having Swank and other educational streaming distributors try to help the sustainability of the open access. Like, what are you guys talking about, your conversations internally?
Yeah, internally, again, I think that goes back to some licensing models. I think we're really trying to test out these where we're providing a collection and, if you will, so a collection and the ability to add on top of that collection, all with one kind of set fixed cost associated with that, so that there's not that fear of, if I go, traditionally the challenge with collections is, what if what I need is not in the collection, right? What if what I need is outside of it, and now all of a sudden I've created an unsustainable budget because I now have to go reallocate new budget dollars to get this one film 2 days before my request, right? Not everybody is like Boston College, which is always my favorite example of anyone from Boston College is in here, but they have a hard line of 30 days turnaround, regardless. If we can turn it around within 6 hours of access, they require 30 days from their instructor. The only school I've ever heard of that has been able to pull
Let's
that
all
off, but-
do it. 30 days, wow.
But we tried to create a model where we're not necessarily locking anybody into one single collection. We try and do create some flexibility. We even have what we call our flex collection, which is something that is intended to be both a collection of films, but also that kind of demand-driven access, taking advantage of both worlds, where there's some flexibility to swap movies in and out of your collection throughout the year to make sure that as needs do arise throughout the year, you're not having to dive back into alternative budgets and grab more funding. And then related to open access, I think it's something that we'd actually absolutely love to explore. I think it's a little bit challenging with just the nature of content that we ultimately provide. But again, going back to the initial conversation of library of films, and some of our conversation yesterday, that there just may be more opportunity for films that are not necessarily traditional within our library that may fit within an open access model, right? We've done some testing with the Colorado Alliance on Interlibrary Loan, which going into that test a couple of years ago, it was something that was proposed to us. My initial reaction was, this will never work in a digital world, right? It's just the concept of loaning something out physical makes sense to me, but within the digital world, there's an infinite number of those things that you would be loaning out. And in my mind, it was something that just wasn't necessarily going to work from a digital perspective, but it ultimately has in that group setting, which I know the Colorado Alliance has talked a lot about what that looks like. Happy to share more information on Interlibrary Loan, and I realize that's not open access, but it is extending access. I think the goal of that was ultimately taking larger institutions and being able to help support the underfunded institutions within their networks so that everybody could have a level of equitable access within streaming media, different than what maybe has traditionally been done. So I think trying new things, I think, like I said, hearing from our partner schools, hearing from all of you on what the needs are, and then we really do truly work to align with those, because we do want to create that sustainable model. We are open to honest feedback, and I know there's been some other sessions throughout the week that have talked about kind of the open communication, the dialogue, and the honesty. And I will just say that if there are things or needs that you have from your institutions, let's voice those. We don't take offense to this isn't working, or this won't work for us, or this is not the way that it should be. I think that's how we ultimately grow together. We try and develop new functionality and interfaces that are built around the needs of schools, and I think our models and our pricing and all of that can evolve just in the same way.
2 minutes for questions.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
One thing you kind of touched on is the problem with requests for things that are coming from Netflix and all of these, whatever, all of Amazon Prime that we can't get institutional access to. There's 2 issues around this. It was okay when it was primarily just Netflix, and you could say, tell your students to get the Netflix account, but now it's too many. It's too diverse, and those are non-traditional studios, they're not, at least to me, I don't know anything about it. But the other issue is that the need for series, so it's not needing just one video, you need to get the entire 8 or whatever of the series, and we need pricing, we need to be able to get access to that stuff that's currently locked within these silos, but we also need reasonable pricing. We can't pay a per motion at what per film cost for each episode of the series. We need to be able to actually, kind of rent, acquire, whatever that series for a reasonable price.
Yeah, so this is where, oh, sorry, so you're asking about requests for consumer platform and pricing, considering series and the unsustainable price structure that currently exists if we're able to get to that content. Okay, so, so my answer is, what we do is we try to find something, we try to work with the faculty at the point of need when we are in this situation and we haven't like tried to address it, beforehand or hadn't known beforehand. And we look for things that we have in the collection. And we have a ton of stuff that's still in the collection in physical format, and we have discs that media players that we loan out. And we encourage them to use the older format stuff. We also try to find them the content freely available online some way. We also encourage sharing among the students if that's a possibility.
Or if that's the only possibility.
Or if that's the
which
only-
It often is.
Yeah, so we get creative and really it's about why do you need that content? What's the thematic approach? What are you trying to engage? What are your learning objectives? And so we really work with the faculty to see if there's an alternative piece of content that we can offer.
So I can also weigh in on the series thing. So I mentioned earlier, we get a lot of the evolving short form content is coming up with that as series. And the way you mentioned that, it can be challenging of kind of licensing a single episode within a series. We have the same challenge on our end. It's actually better for us to license out the entire series, or at least an entire season of a series, for example, as opposed to a single episodic moment for a need. So we're looking at ways, at least from our perspective, that we can offer that in kind of what we would consider as almost like any collection. The series as a whole that would be outside of maybe more of a traditional demand-driven, something that would be outside of just a general aggregate collection focused simply within a specific series or even a season within a series that might be necessary, understanding that the instructional need might be an episode or two within that series, but there's certainly context within the series that is valuable for students outside of that single episodic moment. So that's something that we've been talking about recently as well, and I think have options now, even if they're not necessarily presented to every school, if there's a need for a specific series across the board, that we would very much be open to working with you individually to create an affordable point for them. Again, outside of whatever your existing licensing model might be with us.
So have you thought about doing any kind of a direct-to-consumer approach where you would allow access for just a week or just a day or at a much lower price point?
So
Because it's short form and it's really needed at Flash.
yeah, one of the challenges that we have, so yes, we've evaluated, one of the challenges that we have from our perspective is the kind of effort, the time, the energy that goes into facilitating access, and then the royalties associated with that access are the same whether it's available for 20 minutes or a year, for example, right? So there's some kind of inherent costs that go into just enabling access as a starting point, and then the variability comes with the bandwidth that's ultimately consumed there. So yes, we have, although as of right now, we don't necessarily enable access for anything less than a semester. Currently, we could, it would, at this moment, be the same cost as it would be for a semester, so we're going to schools have that longer term access. But again, I think the costs associated with the series as a whole is something that we're working on changing. Yeah, we're looking over. There were ones not changing now.
Thank you so much for coming, and if you have questions for us, we'll be here
Yeah.
after the public.
Yeah.
Yeah.